really happy to be here today. Driving in, I heard an interesting piece on the radio that said Massachusetts is now the #1 state in the country to live in. This is according to a poll by some realtor, national real estate organization. I heard that as I was sitting in traffic for an hour on my 10-mile drive from Natick to here. So I guess that depends on how you look at it. And now we feel a bit of a nip in the air, so it's, we know what's coming. Any skiers in the room? Skiers? Yeah. Good for you guys, that's great, because the rest of us are about to go into a deep depression for the next several months as we fall off the abyss into frigid cold air in Boston. But I love Boston. I'm a Massachusetts guy. I was born and raised in Arlington, only about 20 minutes from here, kind of in the shadow of Harvard University. And I went to grammar school in Harvard Square, and I worked at a bar called 33 Dunster Street in Harvard Square when I was in college. So for me to be at Harvard Business School, in many ways, feels like I've come full circle. I've been there for 12 years in this role as Chief Marketing Communications Officer, and it was a new role, so I'm the first person to have it. A lot of people will tell you that the best thing about that is that you get to shape the role in your own vision, and that's true. I will tell you the next best thing about it is you can't do worse than the person before you, so there's really nobody to compare you against. I never intended to be at Harvard for 12 years. The longest I had been any place prior to that was about 4.5 years, and that was actually at Northeastern. But like most marketing people, you kind of lose attention after a little while, you get a little antsy, and you want to move on to the next thing. But at Harvard, that hasn't been my experience. I intended to stay for like 5 years, and then at 5 years, things were still really interesting, and then the next time I looked up, it was 10 years, and here I am still 2 years later. And I think part of that speaks to the dynamic nature of Harvard Business School, the fact that it really sits at the apex of kind of the business community and the academic community. So it's not, we're an academic institution, of course, to the core, but everything we talk about are like the most current business issues of the day. So it's a place that sort of holds your interest in a lot of ways. And I think that's part of the reason that I've been there for so long. It was mentioned that we've been around for a long time. It's actually 110 years. We're not yet at 120, but zeroing in on that. And that's the reason I put the word legacy in the title here. A legacy brand, according to academics, and Harvard Business School has done some work on this, is any brand that kind of uses its heritage as a way of marketing itself to the world. And that's great if you have a legacy that you want to talk about. At the same time, it's a little bit of a handicap because brands that are historical and have a legacy like Harvard Business School, and if you think about Harvard University has been around for almost 400 years, that can also be a kind of a drag on your brand because it makes it harder for you to appear as innovative and relevant and in the current moment. And that's a little bit of the fine line that we walk. So I'm going to talk about that today. So here's what I've got in mind for you over the next 40, 45 minutes, and we'll leave some time for questions afterwards. Just a little bit of getting you acquainted with Harvard Business School. I will admit that even growing up here, I didn't know a lot about the place. Even the first day that I came to interview when I was still at Northeastern, I was still amazed to see the scope and breadth of the place. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're set up. Talk a little bit about the changes that have happened in the time that I've been there, because much has changed, not just at the school, but in the world around us and in the marketing function, more importantly. I think the role of marketers in the last 10, 15, 20 years since the advent of the internet has probably changed fundamentally more than any other role in the executive suite. And I think it's been great to be part of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the changes, and then sort of how do we recognize what the challenges are as a brand, as a world-class brand, which we are. We still face a lot of challenges out there in the world, and that's I'm sort of justifying my job by talking about those things, because I do get the question a lot, like, why does Harvard need a CMO? And then I'll talk about sort of how we're going to market. How are we seizing the opportunities that we see? How are we telling our story to the world? So I'll share some of that with you. Any graduates in the room? Anybody go to any of our exec ed programs, anything like that? Cool, okay, so this is Baker Library. This is the sort of iconic building on campus. It was the first building where classes were held at Harvard Business School when we moved across the river from Harvard University. We actually lived across the river in sort of basements at Harvard for about 20 years because they weren't quite sure the business school was going to work. This was at a time when professional schools were still in their infancy. Business wasn't really considered to be a profession or a discipline. So Harvard wasn't quite sure what to make of the business school. But after 20 years, they decided that we had some staying power. So they found a swampy piece of land across the river, across the Charles River, literally like farm area and marshy area that had to be filled in. And this was the first building that went up along with a couple of dormitories. So Baker Library is still there today, standing strong, and it's a beautiful space if you want to come take a look at it. We're best known for the MBA program. We have a 2-year residential MBA program, and we're one of the last schools to sort of hold fast to this notion that a 2 years is the right amount of time to really get people acclimated to the challenges that managers face. So we're a school of general management. We're not a school of finance. We're not a school of entrepreneurship. We cover all of the basic disciplines that a general manager would need to know if they're going to lead an organization. And that all happens in the first year. And those are required courses for everybody. In the second year, students can take elected courses, so you can start to zero in on something if you want at that time. We have 900 students in the first year, 900 in the second year. So that makes us, on scale, the largest MBA program in the country. We also have 150 doctoral students. This is a really important part of what we do, because if you were to ask my dean what keeps him up at night, one of the most serious challenges we face is that there are not enough people who are coming into the teaching ranks who are really qualified to teach at the level that Harvard Business School is looking for. So we have a doctoral program where we train about 150 doctoral students at a time, and we're sending them to other business schools, but we're also hiring some ourselves. It's a little bit of a grow your own type approach. We have an executive education program that moves about 12,000 executives through a year, either in short focused programs that are about a specific thing like digital marketing or nonprofit accounting or something like that. And then we also have 8-week-long programs that are immersive residential programs where executives will come in and actually really experience what the MBA program is like. They'll live in the dorms, they'll be part of a study team, and those programs actually will get you alumni status after students leave. Many of the students that go through those programs, the vast majority, are sponsored by their company. There are also people who are either already in the C-suite or they're headed for the C-suite. About 6 years ago, we launched an online program. And the online program actually addresses a completely different audience, which was part of our strategy in going online. We didn't want to create a program that was like an online MBA or that was in any way fragmenting the brand that we already had. So the courses that we do online are for people who want to understand the language of business. Maybe these are people who graduated with a liberal arts degree and they're working in a business setting and they want to be able to read a balance sheet. They want to be able to know what they're discussing when they go into a financial conversation. So the online programs are really for people who are like pre-MBAs or who want to get a better taste of a particular topic in business. And the big challenge with the online program was, how do we take the experience of what it's like to be on campus and transport that into an online setting, into a virtual setting. And I think 6 years in, we feel pretty good that we've been able to capture a lot of that brand experience. All of the content online is created by Harvard Business School faculty, so you're getting Harvard Business School content that's specifically designed for an online learning experience. Part of that online thing is a virtual classroom that we have at WGBH. It's called HBX Live. It's a studio that has 60 screens on the wall, and we can actually conduct a live case discussion with 60 people anywhere in the world asynchronously, so all in real time. And it's a pretty amazing thing to watch. It's like being at a Monday Night Football game with ESPN and the control station, so it's really cool. And then Harvard Business Publishing is the last big piece of who we are. Harvard Business Publishing, as you probably know, puts out Harvard Business Review, which is sort of the flagship product. But they actually do much more than that. They have a higher ed group that sells business cases to business schools around the world. Roughly 80% of the cases that are used at business schools around the world are written by Harvard Business School faculty and sold through Harvard Business Publishing. And they also have a big corporate education group that provides both online programs as well as sort of hybrid programs where they'll go into companies and train people on general management. So they're a big part of the operation. So that's kind of Harvard Business School 101 for you. This is just a little bit of a sense of how the school, the MBA program in particular, has changed since 1975. It's a work in progress. Our biggest challenge on the MBA front is, how do we bring in the most diverse student set? We teach by the case method, which is basically a discussion. So the way class unfolds is the faculty member will come in and sort of set up the case, and then lets the students have the conversation with each other back and forth. And it's always a business problem. It's focused on a real business issue that some CEO or CMO or somebody in the C-suite faced and how do they sort through the information that they have to come to some sort of a decision. It's the kind of stuff that general managers do every day. But if that class consists of people with all the same background, if it's all people who came out of finance or consulting, it's not a very interesting or dynamic conversation. So our challenge these days is how do we bring in more diversity across every dimension, more women, more people from other countries, more people with different religious backgrounds and different work experiences. And you can see that we've made some progress, obviously, in the last 20 years, but we've got still a lot of work to do on that front. We get about 9,700 applications a year, 9,000, 10,000. We have an 11% acceptance rate, which puts us in the sort of most selective category, along with Stanford and a couple of others. And if you haven't been to campus, I would encourage you to come and just walk around. We actually have a self-guided app, so you can do a tour and walk around and see the place. It's 39 buildings on 40 acres. It's beautifully manicured. The rumor is that we shampoo the squirrels at night. We don't. They get shampooed once a week, not every night. And we also have a global presence. You mentioned that in the beginning. So we are a Boston-based institution. Obviously, we always have been. But like Harvard and like many higher ed institutions, we've started to extend our footprint out into the world. What you see here is a combination of research offices and locations that we send students to each year. In the spring, we send all 900 of our first-year students to one of 14 different countries, emerging market countries, where they're working in small groups with real companies on real business issues. It's a mammoth undertaking for the school to do all the processing, give people all the shots they need to go to places like Nigeria and other countries where there's protocols that they have to do before they go. It's a really impressive thing to see us do this at scale, but it's also kind of an ingenious way to internationalize the student population. And the research centers that we have help us extend our reach out into the world by establishing relationships with CEOs at other companies. The strategy that we have for our globalization is not to extend our physical footprint. So we're not building campuses in other places like a lot of schools are. What we're actually doing is setting up these offices so that we can extend our intellectual footprint into other parts of the world, bring the knowledge that we get there back into campus, and share that with our students so that they're getting the global perspective that they need to be good managers. This is the school's mission. How many of you work for organizations that have missions? So how many of you think that anybody in your institution could recite the mission at the drop of a dime? Probably not many. It's a hard thing. I've worked in places that agonize over their mission. They spend lots of time and resources trying to come up with a mission that encapsulates everything they do. This is a mission that pretty much anybody who has been at the school, either as a staff member or a faculty member, as a student, for even a short period of time, can tell you what this mission is. And so I want to unpack it for you a little bit. So our mission is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. And when we talk about educating, it's really through the transformational experience that people go through when they're on campus. We have, of those 900 students, they form 90-person cohorts. They work together. The whole first year, they sit in the same seat in the same classroom with each other. The teachers come to them. So it's a bonding experience unlike any other. And the campus is designed to be immersive so that we want to create a learning community where people engage with each other all the time around the research and the scholarship that's happening at the school. When we talk about leaders, this is something our dean talks about a lot. We expect that we're going to graduate people who are competent. People who come to Harvard Business School have already demonstrated a lot of competence. They've achieved things that are pretty remarkable. But at the same time, if they don't have the right character when they go out into the workforce, we haven't really done our job well. And there's so much distrust about business these days. I'm going to talk about that more, but we really want our students to think about both the competence side and the character side, and we want to teach them about that. When we talk about a difference, there's been a lot of discussion over the past several years about do we put the word positive before difference. I think that's a little pedantic. Obviously, we're not talking about people going out and making a bad difference in the world, right? We want people to make a positive difference in the world. But what that means is really thinking about themselves, not just as leaders in business, but as leaders who are trying to apply business to solve real-world problems. There's a lot of problems in the world. None of them can be effectively solved without some good general management. And that's sort of the last part that we talk about is, these things are happening on a global scale. You have to recognize that you're part of a global community and that these problems can only be solved if we kind of work together. So that's the school's mission. focusing in now on my team a little bit. So I oversee the central marketing communications team for the school, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. But I actually, in the process of preparing for this presentation, I rewrote our mission. So there's a guy on my team, Mark Catellis, here today. He's our director of communications. He's seeing this for the second time, I think. I didn't actually vet it with the group. So I see our mission. What we used to have was something very technical. Well, I threw like everything that we do into the mix, and it was a paragraph-long sentence. But I think if we want to simplify it, we animate the work of Harvard Business School through integrated marketing communications that demonstrate how we educate leaders who make a difference in the world. We're storytellers. Our job is to tell the story of what's happening at the school in a way that people can appreciate the true nature of Harvard Business School. When I pulled into that parking lot 12, 13 years ago to have my first interview, my assumption, growing up in Arlington in the shadow of Harvard, was that I was going to meet a lot of arrogant people. I was at a place where elitism and arrogance, were going to be kind of the dominating themes. So I kind of, steeled myself up for that. The first person I met was a woman named Ellen Mahoney, who's the head of our human resources. Ellen grew up 3 blocks from me in Arlington. We knew a lot of the same people. She was a little older, so we didn't walk in the same circles, but she was really nice. And then the next person I met was Angela Crispy, who is basically the COO of the school. And she was super nice. She grew up in Needham. And every person I met after that was really nice. And I met faculty, and I met students, and I met alumni. In that interview process, it was very thorough. But the one thing that I came away with was people don't really understand what people at Harvard Business School are like. So the marketing challenge becomes pretty obvious at that point. You have to find a way to tell stories that knock down those misconceptions. And I'll talk about how we're doing that. This is my view of our world. So M&C is us. We're the sun, the hot, bright sun in the middle of the universe. And I've got at least one person from the publishing group here who probably would disagree with this, but I'm not going to ask her. So I show you this as a way of saying that it's complicated where we are. We're not that big, but we find a way to make things pretty complicated. And decentralization is kind of at the core of that. I've worked in large corporations before and firms and experienced elements of this. I think Harvard created the term every tub on its own bottom. So we really reflect the culture of the larger Harvard University. The challenge for us, I've got 15 people at the center. We're basically like an in-service agency. We do everything from media relations to public relations to design and web analytics and sort of manage marketing strategy. The biggest job that we have is actually to connect all these dots in some way. So the size of the bubble represents the size of the team or organization or budget. My bubble's not that big. If I was going to redraw this based on the size of my team and budget, it would be as small as doctoral. But that's not the point. Our goal is to find a way to connect all of these organizations across and make sure that as much as we can, we are aligned and moving in the same direction and presenting sort of one face to the world. And I think we do that pretty well. But it's kind of an ongoing work in progress, right? And these planets fluctuate. Sometimes they move a little bit closer, sometimes they move further away. But this is just a way of showing that it's a little complicated. 2008 was a big year for me. That was the year that I was hired by Harvard Business School. It was also the year of the beginning of the world economic crisis. Those two things are not related, I'm pretty sure. But I wanted to show how things have changed, really. Excuse me. It's been a pretty amazing run. If you look at that orange arrow, that kind of points down to 2008. So at the time that I started at Harvard Business School, Twitter was still in its infancy. Facebook was only 4 years old. None of these other platforms that we use on a regular basis today even existed. Excuse me. So it's remarkable to think about sort of how much has changed in our daily lives as marketing people. We're using a whole new set of tools and suites and approaches that we've had to figure out along the way. And then I sort of double that up with the fact that I'm working at an institution that for years marketed itself in a stealth way. I mean, it was a place that had the doors closed, and Mystique worked for it for most of its existence. Harvard Business School was sort of like, magic happens here. People come in and then they go out and they're CEOs, and that just doesn't work today. You have to be transparent. You have to show the world that you're a human brand. You have to find a way to be authentic. And I would say that social media for us has been like the savior. It's been a way for us to bring the true nature of the institution and the people to the surface. So I've loved, being a marketer at this time. And so what else has changed? Well, the world economic crisis brought on, the Occupy Wall Street movement, or in this case, the Cupy Wall Street movement. The guy on the end didn't get the memo that he had to actually move another foot to unfurl that banner. So obviously attitudes about business have changed, and not in a good way. The Edelman Trust Barometer, I don't know if you're familiar with that. Edelman PR every year does a research report where they look at trust in business, trust in government, and trust in media. And for the first year, actually, in about 8 years, this year, business was higher, the trust in business was higher than it was in those other two categories. Trust in media is actually at the bottom of that list these days for, fake news. Obviously, that's had something to do with it. But even at that, trust in business is not high by any stretch. So clearly attitudes about business have changed, and that obviously, because we're a business school and we're a premier business school, that reflects on us. When the world crisis hit, we probably spent 2 years kind of swinging from our heels, like, why did Harvard Business School allow this to happen, and why didn't you warn us, and why aren't you doing a better job with admissions, why are you admitting people who are criminals, all that kind of stuff. And there's no good defense for that, right? The first thing we did when the crisis hit, this was, I think Lehman's folded on a Friday night, and I got in on Monday morning and met with the dean, and the first reaction at the business school was, what the hell happened here, and why didn't we see it coming, and do we need to take a look at ourselves and be introspective, and what role should we play in this going forward? And that led to 5 or 6 or 7 years of fundamental change in the curriculum. I mean, there were real substantive changes that came out of this. So I say that as a way to say that, we don't just sort of step back and try to deflect what's going on in the world and the criticism that comes at us. We get criticized, and our first reaction is to sort of hunker down and say, okay, is there any truth to this? Is there something that we should be thinking about or doing differently as a result? And I'll show you some of the things that we're doing that are different. Closer to home, this article actually just came out last month, right? That made me feel good. He's just written a book, by the way, if you want to buy it. Martin Parker. So anyway, this is just indicative of the kinds of headlines that we see a lot. There's a lot of questions today, not just about the value of higher education, but more specifically about the value of an MBA. Every time a unicorn company pops up, where you've got Uber or Airbnb, people are like, you don't need an MBA, you can just go start a unicorn company. You don't have to look too far in the leadership ranks of any of those unicorns, by the way, to find an MBA. Typically, they're right next to the CEO because they're actually running the organization. But that notion out there that I don't need to pay for this, I can learn what I need to learn on the job, is really prevalent. And that's one of the things that we have to demonstrate, is that there is a return on the investment of taking 2 years out of your career and coming to HBS and spending probably $200,000 while you're there. There is a return on that. This book is called The Golden Passport. Did anybody read this? You did? You're the person. So The Golden Passport came out like 2 years ago, 700-page book. I love this. It says, the inscription on the top, a deliciously iconoclastic history, broad in its sweep and meticulous in its detail. I had to look up what iconoclastic meant. It basically means like trashing some sort of a cherished or valued place or brand. So this was a book that basically blamed everything that's gone wrong in the world for the last 50 years on Harvard Business School. And this is not the only book like this. I would say every few years we get a book that comes out like this. Sometimes it's written by one of our students who graduates and does a memoir. And there was an FT journalist who came to school and did a book called Ahead of the Curve that was similar in tone and nature. This is what goes with being the premier brand in the category, and I would much rather be part of this conversation than not. But every time something like this comes up, again, we have to sort of take a step back and look at ourselves and say, okay, of these 700 pages, are there any that we should really be zeroing in on and thinking about changing ourselves? And this is a list of the, I think there's 10 schools here, something like that. At the turn of the century, they didn't have rankings, but they did have lists of top universities in the world. And all of these 10 universities in Germany were in that list of the top universities, the top 25 universities at that time. Today, none of them are on that list. So when people ask me, why does Harvard Business School need a CMO, this is the kind of thing I point to. We live in Boston, where Polaroid and Arthur D. Little and other great brands have come and gone. Whoever would have thought Polaroid would fail, you know? Any brand can fail if it doesn't manage itself, if you're not out there managing the reputation and the image of the institution. So I like to use this as just a way to ground myself every so often about the importance of what we're doing in a place that doesn't obviously seem to need it. The need is there. So this is Nitin Noria. Did anybody hear the news? I'm very sad. Yesterday, Nitin announced that he's stepping down as dean of Harvard Business School. He's been our dean for 10 years. He has been a wonderful, amazing leader to work for. I've worked for a lot of good leaders, and I've worked for some bad ones. Nitin, having never really led any organization in his life, stepped into this role 10 years ago and just understood what he needed to do to move the organization forward. And that's not easy in a place like Harvard Business School, where the culture is really entrenched, where you're dealing with faculty, so you have basically no leverage over faculty. They're tenured, and they don't have to do what you tell them to do. So finding a way to motivate and move faculty is a real challenge. So sadly, Nitin is leaving in June. We will have a new leader in place next year. I'm sure they'll be remarkable. But I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about Nitin and what he's done. When he stepped into the role, first of all, he was, let me go back to that previous picture. Can I go back? I cannot go back. Anyway, you saw his face. He was the first non-white male American finance dean at Harvard Business School. So when he stepped into that role, he immediately began to answer some of the questions without even opening his mouth. He was answering questions and criticisms that people had of the school. Indian-born, an organizational behavior guy who writes about things like ethical leadership and corruption and globalization and innovation. And he's been a very visible public figure for the school the entire time that he's been in this dean's role. And he's moved us on a trajectory that I think will have implications for generations to come. So he's accomplished a lot in that period of time. The way that he did it, so universities don't really have corporate strategies. If you're a marketing person in a corporation, there's like a business strategy, and you know that whatever you do, you're going to map back to that business strategy and figure out how to move that forward. In a university, it's a little bit more challenging, but Nitin went on a listening tour in his first summer. He went around the world and spoke to faculty at other institutions. He spoke to alumni of the school. He spoke to business leaders to understand where Harvard Business School needed to go to be prepared for the next century. He really saw this as kind of stepping into the next century of the school. And he came up with these priorities, which we call the 5 I's. Nitin's big on alliteration. He does 3 letters, 3 G's, 5 I's. But the 5 I's here are innovation, and that means innovation in our educational programs. We have been a case method school for our entire existence. What do we need to do to augment the case method and make our students even stronger? Intellectual ambition. There was a time when Harvard Business School was the first and only place that people turned to for management lessons and knowledge. And that changed a lot when the internet came into being. All of a sudden, other institutions were starting to eat into that space for us. So how can we regain our footing at the top of the heap when it comes to intellectual ambition? Internationalization, which is forcing an I word on globalization, but it's an I word. And I talked a little bit about that. So how can we extend our intellectual reach in the world without extending our physical reach? Inclusion, I know everybody here is dealing with this in their own firms too. It's all about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and how can we create an environment where everybody can thrive and do their best work. And the last one is really kind of close to home, integration with Harvard. As I said, Harvard has been very decentralized for its entire existence, and if you think about the power of Harvard, if they were able to bring the medical school and the Kennedy School and the School of Public Health and education all together to address the world's problems, imagine how powerful that would be. So Drew Faust, the former president, handpicked a guy like Nitin because she knew he would buy into that whole theory, and it's worked. So this is the lens that we look at when we tell our marketing stories. Does it map back to one of these things? And it's made it really easy to rally the school behind all of these things. So really what it comes down to, as I mentioned before, is this notion that we need to find a way to help people understand the true nature of what Harvard Business School is all about and what the people are about. And that means bringing the humanity to the surface and talking about the impact that the school has in the world. So I'm going to sort of transition now to telling you about how we're doing that. We think about this a lot. This actually is an article that I made my whole team read. I think I shared it with the entire marketing community across the school. This came out a few years ago, and it's something that I still refer back to today when I think about how do you represent a brand in the digital age. So this is March 2016. You can probably buy it online. Amy, is it available online? Absolutely. You can buy that. There's a quote in that article that I really like, though. Like, that's powerful, and if there's one thing we have in spades, it's content. We have so much content, we really don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to organize it. You know, we've got faculty who do nothing but come in and like go in their office and create stuff. So it's coming out of our ears. So, you know, our challenge is how do we find a way to make all of that content relevant in a current context and using social media as a way to kind of put it out there. As I said, I love social media. It's been a huge help to us in terms of bringing the true voices of the school to the surface. These are just some examples of interesting ways that we're taking this brand that for a long time I think was respected but a little feared, you know, a little intimidating, like nobody's sitting in the front row. I don't know if they're afraid that I'm going to do something. I'm not going to cold call you unless nobody has questions for me, in which case I will cold call probably you at some point. So I think this has been, it's fun for us to actually bring our personality out and have a little fun with people and to show that, you know, we're just people and we work hard and there's a lot of ambitious people at Harvard Business School, but they're working on really important things. This just gives you a sense of our social media presence. I think this is pretty current, you know, probably within the last month. We have broad reach. This doesn't include publishing, by the way, which has even broader reach than we do on several of these platforms. So we're reaching into the millions of people. And these are the kinds of things that we produce, and I'll talk a little bit more. I'm going to share some video clips with you as well. You know, so podcasts have become a really important part of what we do. We do articles, and articles that we write, you know, I think about the way relationships with the media have changed over the last 10 years. When I first got to Harvard, our approach was really like, we're going to reach out to journalists and invite them to campus and introduce them to people and take them to lunch and tell them, you know, what's really cool about what's happening here, and hope that they go back and write a story about it, and hope that they get it right, and hope that I don't dread reading the paper when they write that story. We don't lead that way anymore. We create our own content. We are kind of a content machine. That's sort of what when I talk about being storytellers, it's all about packaging those stories in ways that people can consume them. We know we're getting to the people that care about us and that we care about through social platforms. And if a journalist sees it and wants to write about it, that's great. And that still happens a lot. But that's not kind of the beginning of our strategy. It's usually more the end of our strategy. So if you're going to talk about impact, you have to understand what your impact is in the world. This is a study that the business school co-led with the rest of Harvard. First time Harvard had ever reached out across its entire graduate population to try and understand what the economic and social impact was of Harvard in the world. This is the HBS cut of that, so you're seeing just the business school here. Stanford had done a similar study, truth be told, and that got everybody at Harvard like, wait a second, we know we've created more value than they have, so let's go prove it. So this is what we did. So this represents, you know, if you look at the bottom line there, $2.4 trillion in economic impact that's been created by businesses that were founded by graduates of Harvard Business School. These are still active businesses. A lot of founder activity, a lot of nonprofit activity. So this gives us kind of the basis to go out and tell stories about impact in the world where it relates to alumni. And then how you tell those stories is really up to you. There's lots of different ways to do it. We actually had a campaign across Harvard that ended a couple of years ago. We wrote, I think, 1,200 stories about alumni making a difference in the world. And these are, when I talk about, you know, leaders, this is both with a small L and a capital L. People know about the Jeffrey M. Elts and other people that have come out of Harvard Business School. They're highly visible. What they don't know about is maybe this person who started a nonprofit in their community and is having a big impact in a really important way at a hyper-local level. So these stories cover the gamut of leadership examples that we think about making an impact in the world. I want to talk about sort of research with impact, because when you think about the research that's come out of Harvard Business School over the years, there's been some really important things. There's been like the balanced scorecard and, you know, strategy from Mike Porter. These are all really important, but the nature of research has been changing quite a bit as we bring in faculty who come from other disciplines. Behavioral economics, sociology, political science, they come at business issues with a completely different mindset. And I'll just show you an example of a professor that we have who is an associate professor who's doing some really interesting research that we think is going to have a big impact.
Those were ethnic and religious differences that were capitalized on in a very particular economic context, in a very particular political context, in which businesses and investment by businesses played a key role. They've just gone from being essentially fully employed because they were subsistence farmers or business people 2, now having no job at all and being entirely dependent on aid agencies for survival. And so it seemed to me that the lack of work that they had, the cost of that was far more than just the lack of money.
So I show that just as an example of, here's a person who is a business school faculty member who's going to a refugee camp on the other side of the world to look at the implications of taking work away from people and how that can completely change, people's lives in a negative way. Probably not what most people would think about when they're thinking about faculty work at Harvard Business School. And we have a lot of faculty who are working on things like that. This is a grab from our MBA site. The mission is played out very explicitly here on the MBA site. Really what we're trying to do in the MBA program is help students who may not necessarily think about Harvard Business School as a place for them. We want to help them see themselves at Harvard Business School. And when you see the range of students that are there today, we have lots of examples that we can share that might make somebody who otherwise might not come, who we would really value to have in the community, might make them think twice about coming. This portrait project clip that I show here, the portrait project is an exercise that we do with our students every year where there's a poem that's been written that ends with the line, tell me what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And all the students write sort of personal essays. We team them up with this amazing photographer who's a graduate of the school, and we put those out over the website. And it just shows a really deep personal side of our students that would completely allay those concerns about our students being arrogant and conceited and greedy. They're ambitious, they have big ideas, they want to accomplish big things in the world, and Harvard Business School is going to help them to do that, but they don't want to do it for themselves. They're here to do it because they want to make an impact. Again, just showing diversity at the school. We have a very active LGBTQ community, and finding a way to bring them to the surface on the website so that students might be able to see and connect with somebody in this community that they might not otherwise have thought of. And another video clip that I'll share. Again, this is a way to help students see themselves on campus.
I was raised in a rural town in Argentina, so I spent a lot of time playing outside the house and spending all the day in the farm.
I went to about a high school of 120 people. Maybe 20 of my graduating class went to college. Like the Ivy Leagues always seemed out of reach. As far back as our collective memory can go, someone in my family has served in the military, and that really inspired me to pursue the same path.
We grew up on the west side of Chicago, and we didn't have a lot, but there was a lot of love within my family. I was the sports junkie. I knew every player's stats, and so that was my way of kind of being a part of the grown-up conversation.
I come from a city in the northwest of Greece. My hometown has great baklava. It's famous for the baklava. I love the piano. I've been playing the piano since I was 6, and then I started being involved with handball. I've always in my life had these moments of feeling I should quit. I had it also for piano, and I had it also for handball. And it's moments where it becomes very challenging, and I would probably go back after a week and start again and be.
So you get the idea. So these are students that are showing sort of vulnerability. Every student on the first day at Harvard Business School, when they're sitting in our big, welcome area, thinks that they're a mistake. They're like, oh my God, how did I get through the admissions committee? I don't belong here. I'm sitting next to somebody who started a nonprofit. Over here, I've got somebody who's in NASA. So that insecurity exists across the whole group, and we're trying to find ways to tell stories that alleviate that concern from people who might be thinking about it, but are like, why would I bother applying to Harvard? I'll never get in there. You might. So it's worth a shot, worth taking a shot. HB Up Close is a series that we actually started a couple of years ago. One of the things we've learned is that people who come to campus and experience it in some way usually leave impressed with the experience and intrigued. I mean, the brand experience extends to everybody who comes to campus. And we started telling stories about how we manage the institution. Do we apply the lessons that our faculty teach? Are we practicing what we teach, so to speak? And HBS Up Close is our way of kind of diving into the way that we manage the school. We put these out through social media. They get a great response. People are really interested in it. And in many cases, we've been asked to go and speak to other institutions about how we do various things because they want to learn how we sort of scale up. So this has been a fun way to, again, humanize the school in a different way. When I talk about making research relevant, let's just check out the title of this. Mechanisms of Technology Reemergence and Identity Change in a Mature Field, Swiss Watchmaking, 1970 to 2008. Well, there's a grabber. So that seems really esoteric, right? Like, who's going to read that thing? So this is a white paper, not unlike a lot of white papers that our faculty write. Academics do this. They write white papers. They submit them to journals so they can get into the journal and get published so they become tenured faculty. That's kind of the path that they take. So as a marketer, our challenge is to read this and say, what can we pull out of here that we think we can make relevant? This came out not long before Apple introduced its iWatch. So about 6 months after that paper was published, the iWatch came out, and we went to Ryan Raffaele, who basically, his area of expertise is he studies old stuff that's becoming new again. So like vinyl records and bookstores, and it's really interesting stuff, but it's dry in a white paper form. So we interviewed Ryan, and we put the interview out over social media, and it was seen by a New York Times journalist, who then turned it into an article above the fold business issue, a Sunday issue of the New York Times. So I show this as a way to say that one of the challenges marketers face, I think, today is how do you break through the clutter? How do you find a way to make your stuff relevant? Because, you know, relevance is so important in the content that you're creating. And sometimes, you know, you strike gold. And, you know, so this worked out well. This is another example of that, where the 100th anniversary of Ernest Shackleton's expedition happened a couple of years ago. There was a lot of media coverage around it, and we took a case that had been written many years before by one of our faculty members. We pulled that to the surface. I did a podcast with her talking about it, and we put that back out and sort of brought this case back to life, and with great success. She wound up doing a lot of media interviews as part of that. And then, you know, we are very fortunate to have a new building on campus that has an amazing facility in it. I'll just do a quick video showing this to you. Recorded live in Claremont Hall Studio at Harvard Business School.
Ready to go?
Lots of times when people try to teach political science or economics, they start with...
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Size works for you. You can put all the questions up on your screen.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
For NPR News,
with the Marketplace Morning
and this
Report.
is Choiceology.
Freakonomics Radio is produced.
Welcome to Climate Rising.
We want to stay a hand's length away from the mic.
During my time at HBS here, started 2 organizations.
Precision medicine has a set of obstacles that come
Your subtype, your specific gene.
You're listening to Cold Call.
Managing the future of work. The disruptive voice.
After hours.
Skydeck.
Every time I see that, I feel like I'm going bald. It looks like, I don't know. So we love having this studio. It opened a year ago. And part of the reason we love it is that podcasts have become a really hot commodity among our faculty, among our students. How many people listen to podcasts here? Okay, so just great example. I don't know if I asked that question a year ago, I bet half the number of hands would have gone up. Streaming technology, you know, in our cars, at our gyms, has made it so much easier for people to consume this kind of content. And our faculty like it because it's kind of like a long-form article. It allows them to go deep on a topic in a way that they might not take the time to read a 4,000-word article, but they'll listen to a 20-minute podcast. And I love it because it allows us to bring their true voice to the surface, to show people how passionate they are and how smart they are, but also how relatable they are. So I'm going to shamelessly plug my podcast, which is Cold Call. You see that in the middle up there. I interview faculty about case studies they've written. And we started Cold Call because we knew the case study had been criticized quite a bit, actually, by people saying it was no longer the best way to teach about business. And I wanted to show people that not only was it a great way to teach about business, because all these cases are super relatable to current business issues, but also our faculty are just so cool and so much fun to talk to and listen to on these. So we've been able to have great success with that. And these other podcasts, we've got some here that are featured on our HBR network. I would encourage you to just check them all out. You probably would find some stuff you'd really like. This is just one way, like how do you bring a podcast to life visually? I just think this is cool, so I'm going to show a minute of this.
And then he gets interested in chocolate. And he gets interested in chocolate because he happens to be in 1893 in Chicago at the Grand Columbian World Exposition, a world fair, very, very famous world fair there. And he sees a chocolate manufacturing exhibit. And that gets him interested, comes back and starts playing with chocolate.
I'm running out of time, but that's Nancy Kane. She's a business historian. This is a case that she wrote several years ago about Milton Hershey. So again, how do you make that relevant today? Well, on Valentine's Day, we did a special issue of Cold Call. about Milton Hershey. We put that out through our social channels and got a lot more attention focused on that case. Before we go to questions, I want to show you one more. This is just about kind of how we think about partnerships. Nobody does this stuff alone very successfully. I'm always talking with media outlets about ways that we can partner with them. And I'm not talking about a transactional relationship. I'm talking about a strategic, content-focused relationship. So these are, some of the organizations that we've worked with in the past. I'm going to leave you because Nithin's leaving. I'm going to show you one last video that features a little bit of Nithin, and then we'll go to questions.
I would like to officially welcome the class of 2021.
We are so glad you are here. This is going to be a great experience. And I hope a transformational journey from the incipient leader you are today to the leader you hope to become and the leader the world needs you to be.
So you might wonder, what is this magical thing that people talk about that is a transformational experience? We believe that leadership is about knowing, doing, and being. It's knowing yourself, it's developing your sense of character, it's understanding yourself well. It's working to leverage other people around you to make a good decision as opposed to just feeling that in every case, I have to make the best decision myself. Make sure to use what this place can do, which is to actually form relationships that you would otherwise be unlikely to do, and be ready to be surprised.
There are many avenues to pursue here. It's important to explore, to keep an open mind to new adventures and perspectives, and to take risks.
Don't forget those who got you here. Keep them top of mind and seek out moments of gratitude.
And third, and most importantly, enjoy each other's company. Be cognizant that we all come from different walks of life with widely varying life experiences, but it is a common kindness, mutual respect, and understanding of differences that is the glue that holds this community together.
You will learn as much from your peers and as much from the differences that you have with your peers as you will learn anything about any matter yourself.
You'll want to be able to take those differences and turn them into sources of creativity and imagination and ultimately economic value.
Why you want to be a leader, the way in which you want to be a leader, your own sense of being as a leader, understanding how people experience you as a leader. The farther you get on these ways, the more likely this is to be a transformational educational experience for you.
So, I'll let Nithin have the final word there, but that's the way we're trying to portray the school today. Maybe different than what you might have thought, you would have seen. So, thank you.